He stood outside a billionaire's mansion gate, selling water in the freezing rain to survive. When the luxury car stopped and a window rolled down, the boy heard a question that would change two lives forever. "Where are your parents?" His answer: "My mom died, but she said my father had eyes like yours," set off a chain of discoveries that would expose a decade-old betrayal, uncover a family secret, and prove that sometimes the poorest child holds the richest truth. Hello, friends. Welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. New York, London, maybe South Africa, or Jamaica. We want to know. The rain fell hard and cold on the streets outside the Drake mansion, turning everything gray and miserable. Jonas Miller stood at the tall iron gates, his small body shaking from cold and hunger. He was only 8 years old, but he looked even smaller than that, a ghost of a child, nearly invisible to the world rushing past. His jeans had holes in both knees, threads hanging loose like defeated flags. His worn jacket, once blue but now faded to a sad gray, was soaked completely through. Water dripped from his dark hair into his eyes. His shoes, 2 sizes too big, donated from a shelter, squelched with every movement, the soles separating from the canvas. In his hands he held a blue plastic cooler. Inside were 6 bottles of water, his last 6 bottles. If he didn't sell them tonight, there would be no food tomorrow. "Water for sale," he called out to the few cars that passed by, his voice barely loud enough to hear over the rain. $2, please." A black SUV sped past, spraying dirty water across his legs. A taxi slowed for a moment, the driver glancing at him, then accelerating away. A woman in a Mercedes looked straight ahead, deliberately avoiding eye contact. No one stopped. No one ever stopped. Jonas had been standing at this corner for 3 hours. His fingers were numb, barely able to grip the cooler's handle anymore. His stomach hurt from hunger, a deep gnawing ache that had become as familiar as breathing. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, when he'd found half a sandwich in a parked trash can. But he couldn't go back to the shed behind the bus station empty-handed. Without money, there would be no food tomorrow either. No water to sell the day after. The cycle would break, and Jonas would have nothing. Every step he took, every word he spoke, was for survival. And for the memory of his mother, Elena, who had died 6 months ago in a free clinic, holding his hand and whispering words he still didn't understand. Jonas didn't complain. His mother had taught him to be strong, to never give up even when the world seemed determined to crush him. "Keep trying, Jonas," she used to tell him, her voice soft even when the coughing fits made her weak. "One day, things will get better. One day, you'll find the man who looks like your father. When you do, you'll understand everything." Jonas never understood what she meant. He'd never known his father. His mother never talked about him, not his name, not where he was, not why he wasn't there. Whenever Jonas asked, her eyes would fill with a sadness so deep it scared him, and she'd change the subject quickly. All she ever said was, "He had eyes like ice, cold but beautiful, just like yours, my sweet boy." Now, standing in the rain outside the richest neighborhood he'd ever seen, Jonas wished his mother were still alive. She would know what to do. She would know how to survive this impossible life. Then he heard it, the low, powerful purr of an expensive engine. A black Bentley, sleek and shining even in the downpour, pulled up to the mansion gates. The car was so beautiful it looked like it belonged in a movie, not on a real street where real people suffered. Jonas took a tentative step forward, hope flickering despite 6 hours of rejection. The tinted window slid down slowly, electronically smooth. Inside sat a man, tall, even sitting down. Broad shoulders in an expensive charcoal suit. Dark hair styled perfectly, silver threading through at the temples. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones. The kind of face that belonged on magazine covers. But it was the eyes that made Jonas freeze. Cold, ice blue, piercing. Exactly like his mother had described. Ice cold, but beautiful. Jonas stared, unable to look away. The man stared back, his expression unreadable, not cruel, but not kind either, just assessing. Studying Jonas like he was a puzzle that needed solving. Then his eyes dropped to the cooler in Jonas's hands. "What are you doing out here?" The man's voice was deep, controlled, measured. The voice of someone used to being obeyed without question. Jonas swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. "Selling water, sir." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "In the rain?" At night? How old are you? 8, sir. Jonas shifted the cooler to his other hand, trying to stop his arms from shaking. I have 6 bottles left. $2 for one, or 3 bottles for $5. They're cold and... Where are your parents? The question hit Jonas like a physical blow. His practiced sales pitch died on his lips. This was the question he hated most. The question that made other kids at the shelter laugh at him. The question that reminded him he was different, alone, unwanted. He looked down at his soaked, falling apart shoes. Water pooled around his feet. My mom died, Jonas said quietly, the words still painful after 6 months. 6 months ago. Silence. The rain pounded against the Bentley's roof, each drop like a tiny drumbeat. And your father? The man asked, his voice strangely tight now, like something was caught in his throat. Jonas shook his head slowly. I never knew my dad. Mom never told me his name, she said. She said it was complicated. More silence. Jonas could feel the man staring at him intensely, but he couldn't bring himself to look up. Shame burned in his chest, shame at being fatherless, motherless, homeless. Then Jonas remembered something his mother had said on her last night, when she was barely conscious, the fever making her delirious. She grabbed his hand with surprising strength and whispered, if you ever need help, find the man with eyes like yours, cold like winter but warm underneath. He's... She never finished. She died that night, and Jonas was left with fragments of sentences that made no sense. But standing here, looking at this stranger whose eyes were exactly like his mother, described exactly like his own, Jonas felt something strange stirring in his chest, something he couldn't name. Recognition? Impossible. He'd never met this man. But still, my mom, Jonas started, his voice shaking from more than just cold. Before she died, she told me something. She said, he forced himself to look up, meeting those ice-blue eyes directly. She said, my father had eyes like yours, cold like winter. I didn't know what she meant, but... He trailed off, watching the man's face. What happened next would stay with Jonas for the rest of his life. The man's entire body went rigid. His hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. His face drained of color, going from healthy tan to pale gray in seconds. His jaw clenched so hard Jonas could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. And his eyes, those cold ice-blue eyes, suddenly weren't cold anymore. They were blazing with something fierce and desperate and terrified all at once. For a long, suffocating moment, neither of them spoke. The rain was the only sound, hammering against metal and pavement. Then the man's voice, barely more than a whisper, raw and broken. What was your mother's name? Jonas's heart pounded. Elena, he said softly. Elena Arden. The man closed his eyes as if Jonas had just stabbed him. His entire face crumpled, not in anger, but in a grief so profound it was painful to witness. His jaw worked like he was trying to speak but couldn't form words. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. Not from rain, the window was still up on his side. Tears. This powerful, wealthy man was crying. Elena, he whispered, and the way he said her name like a prayer, like a curse, like the name of someone he'd loved and lost, made Jonas's throat tighten. The man's hands were shaking now. He released the steering wheel and pressed one palm against his mouth, fighting for control. How? His voice cracked. How did she? When did she? She got sick, Jonas said, his own eyes burning with tears. Last winter. She couldn't afford the medicine. She tried to work, but she was too weak. By spring, he couldn't finish. The man made a sound, not quite a sob, but close. He covered his face with both hands. Jonas stood in the rain, confused and frightened and strangely hopeful all at once. Why was this man crying over his mother? How did he know her? After what felt like forever, the man lowered his hands. His face was composed again, but barely. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his voice was thick when he spoke. Tomorrow morning, he said, come back here, 8 o'clock. Can you do that? Jonas nodded, not trusting his voice. What's your name? The man asked. Jonas. Jonas Miller. Jonas. The man repeated it like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. Tomorrow, Jonas. He stopped, struggled, tried again. There's something I need to show you. Something about your mother. He couldn't finish. Okay, Jonas whispered. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. He extracted several bills. Jonas saw at least 320s and handed them through the window. "For the water," the man said. "All of it. And," his voice broke again, "get yourself something to eat. Please." Jonas took the money with shaking hands. $60. More money than he'd seen in months. "Thank you, sir," he managed. "Alexander," the man said quietly. "My name is Alexander Drake." The window began to slide up but then stopped halfway. "Jonas?" Alexander's voice was barely audible over the rain. "Did your mother? Did she ever?" He seemed to be fighting with himself. "Did she ever mention me?" Jonas thought back to his mother's final words. "Find the man with eyes like yours." "I think so," Jonas said. "She told me to find someone. Someone with eyes like mine." Alexander's face crumpled again. He nodded once, unable to speak, and the window slid the rest of the way up. The mansion gates swung open electronically. The Bentley drove through, its red taillights disappearing up the long, tree-lined driveway toward a house so enormous it looked like a castle. Jonas stood there in the rain for a long time, clutching $60 and his cooler of water, his mind spinning. What just happened? Why did Alexander Drake look like he'd seen a ghost when Jonas said his mother's name? And why did his eyes, those cold, ice-blue eyes, look exactly like the ones Jonas saw in the mirror every morning? Jonas didn't sleep that night. He lay on the thin mattress in his shed, staring at the rusted metal ceiling, replaying everything over and over. The man's face when he heard Elena's name, the tears, the way his hands shook. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. What did Alexander Drake want to show him? What did he know about Jonas's mother? At 7:30 a.m., Jonas was already standing at the mansion gates, wearing the cleanest clothes he had, which wasn't saying much. He'd washed his face and hands in the bus station bathroom and tried to comb his hair with his fingers. He wanted to look presentable. He didn't know why it mattered, but it did. At exactly 8 o'clock, the gates swung open. Jonas walked through, his heart pounding. The driveway seemed impossibly long, lined with perfect hedges and flowering trees. The mansion loomed ahead, white stone, tall columns, windows that gleamed in the morning sun. Before he reached the front door, it opened. Alexander Drake stood in the doorway, and Jonas barely recognized him. Yesterday in the car, Alexander had looked polished and powerful, untouchable. Today he looked like he hadn't slept either. His hair was uncombed, his shirt was wrinkled. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He looked human, broken. "Jonas," Alexander's voice was hoarse. "Thank you for coming." "Yes, sir." "Come in, please." Alexander stepped aside. Jonas walked into the mansion and stopped, his mouth falling open. The entrance hall was massive, bigger than the entire shelter where he sometimes slept. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, with a crystal chandelier hanging like a frozen waterfall. Marble floors reflected the morning light. A grand staircase curved upward, its banister gleaming. Everything was beautiful. Everything was perfect. And everything felt empty. No sounds of cooking, no voices, no laughter. Just silence that pressed against Jonas's ears. "Are you hungry?" Alexander asked. "I can have." "Mr. Drake," Jonas interrupted, his courage surprising even himself. "You said you wanted to show me something. About my mom." Alexander's face tightened. He nodded slowly. "Yes, I did. He gestured toward a sitting room off the main hall. "This way." Jonas followed him into a room with cream-colored sofas and more paintings than Jonas had ever seen outside a museum. But he barely noticed any of it. Because there, on a small table near the window, was a photograph in a silver frame. A woman. Young, maybe in her early 20s. Long dark hair, gentle smile, eyes warm and full of life. Jonas walked toward it like he was in a dream. His feet moved without him telling them to. "That's..." His voice came out as a whisper. "That's my mom." Behind him he heard Alexander make a sound, half sob, half exhale. Jonas picked up the frame with trembling hands. His mother looked so different here, healthy, happy, beautiful in a way. He'd never seen her. She'd always been sick, always tired, always worried. But this woman in the photograph was glowing. "Where did you get this?" Jonas turned to face Alexander, who was standing frozen a few feet away. "How do you have a picture of my mom?" Alexander's face was white. "She worked here, 10 years ago. She was..." His voice broke. "She was my maid." "Your maid?" "Yes." Alexander moved closer, his eyes fixed on the photograph. Elena Arden. She started working here 11 years ago. She was. She was the kindest person I'd ever met. His voice dropped to almost nothing. And I loved her. The room spun around Jonas. You loved her? More than I knew how to say. Alexander's eyes were wet again. We were together for almost 2 years. Secretly, my father. He didn't approve. Class differences. Reputation. All the things that shouldn't matter but somehow do in families like mine. Jonas stared at him, pieces clicking together in his mind but not quite forming a complete picture. We were planning to get married, Alexander continued. I was going to tell my father, stand up to him, make it official. And then Elena told me she was pregnant. Jonas's hands went numb. The photograph nearly slipped from his grip. She was so scared, Alexander said, lost in memory. But I was overjoyed. I started preparing a nursery, buying baby clothes, planning our future. His face crumpled. And then one day, she just vanished. No note, no explanation. She was gone, and I never saw her again. Why? Jonas whispered. Why would she leave? I didn't know. For 9 years I didn't know. Alexander's voice turned bitter. But last night after meeting you, I went through old files, and I found a letter. From my father, to Elena. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, hands shaking, and unfolded it. End this relationship, Alexander read aloud, his voice thick with rage and grief. She will destroy your reputation. I will pay her to disappear. He threatened her, Jonas. He told her I'd lose everything if she stayed, and she believed him. She left to protect me. Jonas felt tears streaming down his face. She was protecting you? Yes, and she was protecting the baby she was carrying. Alexander looked at Jonas directly now, and Jonas saw his own eyes reflected back at him. A baby who would be about 8 years old now. A baby who would have dark hair and eyes exactly like mine. The words hung in the air between them. Jonas's heart hammered so hard he thought it might break through his chest. Are you saying? I think. Alexander's voice cracked completely. I think you're my son, Jonas. I think your mother ran away carrying my child. I think she raised you alone, in poverty, while I lived here thinking she'd abandoned me. He dropped to his knees, eye level with Jonas now. I think I've been looking for you both for 9 years, and I never knew where to search. Jonas couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he was hearing. I need to know for certain, Alexander said. Will you take a DNA test? Will you let me find out the truth? Jonas looked down at the photograph in his hands. His mother, young and happy, probably already pregnant with him when this was taken. Then he looked at Alexander, at the man with eyes exactly like his. The man who'd loved his mother. The man who'd been searching without knowing what he'd lost. Yes, Jonas whispered. Yes. Alexander closed his eyes, relief and pain washing over his face in equal measure. Thank you, he breathed. Thank you. And for the first time in 6 months, Jonas felt something he'd thought was gone forever. Hope. Alexander didn't go to work that day. For the first time in 15 years, he called his assistant and canceled everything: meetings, conference calls, a product launch he'd been planning for months. None of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the boy, with Elena's smile in his own eyes. After Jonas left promising to return the next day for the DNA test, Alexander locked himself in his private study on the 3rd floor. The room was lined with dark wood shelves, filled with books he'd never read, and awards he'd stopped caring about years ago. He sat at his mahogany desk and opened his laptop, fingers trembling as he accessed the encrypted personnel archives. Files dating back 20 years. Every employee who'd ever worked at Drake Mansion. He typed, Elena Arden. Her file appeared. Employment start date, the 15th of March 2014. Position, household staff, domestic service. Employment end date, the 8th of February 2016. Reason for termination, voluntary resignation, no notice given. Alexander stared at the dates. Hired 11 years ago, left 9 years ago, abruptly, without explanation. He scrolled through her employment records. Performance reviews all excellent. No disciplinary issues, no complaints. She'd been perfect. And then she was gone. Alexander clicked on the additional notes section, something he'd never looked at before. Most employee files had nothing there, just a blank field. But Elena's had an attachment, a scanned letter. Dated the 7th of February 2016. the day before she disappeared. His blood went cold when he saw the signature at the bottom. Victor Drake. His father. Alexander's hands shook as he began to read. Miss Arden, I'm writing to inform you that your continued employment at Drake Estate is no longer tenable. More specifically, your relationship with my son must end immediately. I am aware of the situation. I am aware that you are carrying his child, and I am aware that you believe this gives you some claim to our family. It does not. My son has a future, a company to inherit, a reputation to uphold, responsibilities you cannot begin to comprehend. A relationship with a maid, regardless of the circumstances, would destroy everything we've built. I am prepared to offer you $50,000 to leave quietly and never contact Alexander again. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement. You will not attempt to claim paternity or pursue financial support. You will disappear from our lives completely. If you refuse, I will ensure that Alexander loses his inheritance. I will make certain he is removed from the company. I will destroy his future because of your selfishness. Every opportunity I have given him will be stripped away, and he will know it was because of you. The choice is yours, Miss Arden. Take the money and protect the man you claim to love by leaving him. Or stay, and watch me dismantle his entire life. This is for his own good, whether you understand that or not. You have 24 hours to decide. Victor Drake. Alexander read the letter 3 times. Then he stood up and threw his laptop against the wall. The screen shattered. Pieces of plastic and glass scattered across the hardwood floor. You bastard! The scream tore from his throat. You absolute bastard! He grabbed the nearest object, a crystal paperweight, and hurled it through the window. Glass exploded outward into the morning air. Alexander stood there, chest heaving, hands clenched into fists, rage and grief colliding so violently he thought he might collapse. His father had known Elena was pregnant, had known Alexander loved her, and had threatened to destroy Alexander's entire future unless she left. And Elena, kind, selfless Elena, had believed him, had taken the threat seriously, had disappeared to protect Alexander from his own father's cruelty. She'd given up everything to save him, and he'd spent 9 years thinking she'd abandoned him. Alexander sank into his chair, the anger draining away, leaving only grief. Memories flooded back, memories he'd locked away because they hurt too much. The first time he saw Elena, she was arranging flowers in the main hall, humming softly. When she noticed him watching, she'd smiled and said, "Sorry, sir. I didn't realize you were there." And he'd thought, she has the warmest smile I've ever seen. Their first real conversation. Late one night, he'd found her reading in the staff kitchen a worn paperback novel. "I thought everyone was asleep," she'd said. They'd talked for 2 hours about books and dreams and everything they wanted from life. The night he kissed her, in the garden under the oak tree, rain starting to fall. "We shouldn't," she'd whispered. "I don't care," he'd answered. The pendant. He'd given it to her on their 1-year anniversary. A silver circle engraved with his initials A.D. "This is a promise," he'd told her. "When I take over from my father, we'll be together openly. I'll marry you. Nothing will stop us." The last time he saw her, she'd looked pale, nervous. "Alexander, I need to tell you something. Something important." But his father had called, demanding his presence in a meeting. "Tonight," he'd promised Elena. "We'll talk tonight." She was gone by morning. Alexander opened his desk drawer with shaking hands and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was an engagement ring, simple, elegant, the one he'd planned to give Elena that night. He'd never had the chance. "I'm so sorry," he whispered to the empty room, tears streaming down his face. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. I should have seen what he was doing." She died alone, in poverty, raising their son without help, hiding because she thought she was protecting him. And he'd been here, in his mansion, angry at her for leaving, never knowing she'd sacrificed everything. "Jonas," Alexander said aloud, the name feeling sacred now. "My son." He had to know for certain, had to confirm what his heart already knew. Tomorrow, they'd do the DNA test. And if when it confirmed what he already believed, Alexander would find where Jonas had been living, would learn what Elena's final years had been like. Would make sure his son never suffered another day. And then he would confront his father. Victor Drake had stolen 9 years from him, had forced Elena into poverty, had orphaned his own grandson. That debt would be paid. Alexander stood, glass crunching under his feet, and looked at the shattered window. His old life, the one where he believed his father's rules, where class and reputation mattered more than love, was gone. Tomorrow, his real life would begin. The life where he was a father. Alexander waited until Jonas left the mansion the next morning, then followed him. Not closely, he kept his distance, driving an unmarked sedan instead of the Bentley. He'd spent the entire night thinking about the boy, his son, possibly his son. Where had he been living? How had he survived? The answers came 20 minutes later, and they broke Alexander's heart. Jonas walked through the city streets with purpose, carrying his blue cooler. He stopped at a corner store, bought 6 bottles of water with the money Alexander had given him, and continued toward the east side of town, to the bus station. But Jonas didn't go inside. He walked around the building, through a gap in a chain-link fence, into an area filled with abandoned maintenance equipment and trash. And there, tucked behind a rusted dumpster, was a shed. Alexander parked across the street and waited. After a few minutes, Jonas emerged again without the cooler, wearing a slightly different shirt, and headed back toward the city center. Going to sell water. Going to survive. When Jonas was out of sight, Alexander crossed the street and approached the shed. It was worse than he'd imagined. The metal walls were rusted through in places, holes letting in wind and rain. The door hung crooked on broken hinges. No lock, no security. Anyone could walk in. Alexander pulled the door open and stepped inside. The shed was barely 6 feet by 8 feet. A thin mattress lay directly on the concrete floor, stained, torn, springs visible through rips in the fabric. A single blanket, threadbare and dirty, no pillow. In one corner sat a plastic bag. Alexander knelt beside it, hands shaking, and carefully opened it. Inside, a worn comb, the kind you'd buy at a dollar store. A faded photograph, Elena, younger and healthy, smiling at the camera. Alexander recognized the background. The mansion garden. He'd taken this photo himself, years ago. And underneath, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, a broken silver necklace. Alexander lifted it with trembling fingers. The pendant was tarnished, the chain snapped in 2 places, but the engraving was still visible. A.D. Alexander Drake. He'd given this to Elena on their anniversary. "This is a promise," he'd told her. "This means you're mine and I'm yours, forever." She'd worn it every day, never took it off. And now it was here, in a plastic bag in an abandoned shed, kept by a boy who'd never known his father but treasured this broken piece of silver like it was made of gold. Alexander's vision blurred. Tears fell onto the pendant, onto his hands, onto the concrete floor. This was where his son lived. This was where Jonas slept at night, cold, hungry, alone, no heat, no running water, no safety. While Alexander had been sleeping in a mansion with 12 bedrooms. "Oh God," Alexander choked out. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." He didn't know how long he sat there, holding the pendant, weeping for the woman he'd lost and the child who'd suffered because of his father's cruelty. Then he heard footsteps. The shed door opened, and Jonas froze. "What are you doing here?" The boy's voice was sharp with fear and anger. "How did you find me?" Alexander stood quickly, wiping his eyes, still clutching the pendant. "Jonas, That's mine." Jonas lunged forward, reaching for the necklace. "You can't take that. It's all I have of her." "I know." Alexander dropped to his knees, holding the pendant out. "I know what this is, Jonas, because I'm the one who gave it to your mother." Jonas stopped, confusion replacing anger. "What?" "Look." Alexander turned the pendant, so the engraving caught the light. A.D. Alexander Drake. "I gave this to Elena 10 years ago. I told her it was a promise that we'd be together forever." His voice broke. "I meant it. But my father tore us apart and she kept this all these years. She kept it and she gave it to you." Jonas stared at the pendant, then at Alexander, his young face cycling through a dozen emotions. "Your mother told you to find the man with eyes like yours," Alexander continued. "She told you because she wanted you to find me. She wanted you to know." He swallowed hard. "Jonas, I think I'm your father. I think Elena left to protect me, and she raised you alone, and she never forgot me, just like I never forgot her." "But," Jonas's voice was small, frightened. But how do you know? How can you be sure? We'll take the test. Tomorrow. We'll know for certain. Alexander held out the pendant. But Jonas, I need you to understand something. Whether the DNA confirms it or not, I already know in my heart. You're my son. You have to be. And I'm not letting you sleep in this shed another night. Where else can I go? Jonas's face crumpled. I don't have anywhere else. You have a home, Alexander said firmly. You've always had a home. I prepared a nursery for you 9 years ago. It's been waiting for you this entire time. And if you'll let me, if you'll trust me, I want to take you there tonight. What if the test says you're wrong? Jonas whispered. What if I'm not your son? Then I'll still help you. I'll still make sure you're safe. Alexander's voice was fierce. But Jonas, I'm not wrong. I look at you, and I see Elena. I see myself. I see the child I thought I'd lost forever. Jonas's breath hitched. Tears streamed down his dirty face. I always dreamed my dad was alive. Mom said he was out there somewhere, but I thought she was just saying that to make me feel better. I am alive. Alexander carefully placed the pendant in Jonas's hand, closing the boy's fingers around it. And I'm here now, and I'm never leaving you again, I promise. For a long moment they knelt on the concrete floor of that terrible shed, looking at each other, father and son, separated by years of lies but connected by blood and a broken silver pendant. Then Jonas whispered, Can we do the test now? I want to know. I need to know. Yes, Alexander said. Right now, and then I'm taking you home. Home, Jonas repeated, like he was testing how the word felt. Home, Alexander confirmed. Where you were always meant to be. 3 days felt like 3 years. Alexander had arranged for the DNA test within hours of finding Jonas in that shed, a private lab, expedited processing, complete discretion, the fastest, most accurate results money could buy. Now, sitting alone in his study at 8 a.m., on a Wednesday morning, Alexander held an envelope that would confirm what his heart already knew. His hands shook as he opened it. Paternity test results. Alleged father, Alexander Drake. Child, Jonas Miller. Conclusion, 99.9% probability of paternity. Alexander Drake cannot be excluded as the biological father of Jonas Miller. The paper blurred as tears filled Alexander's eyes. He pressed his palm against his mouth, trying to hold back the sob building in his chest. But it came anyway, a raw, broken sound that echoed through the empty study. Elena, he whispered to the photograph on his desk. We have a son. We have a beautiful, brave son. He wept like he hadn't wept in years. Not the contained, controlled tears he'd shed before, but full-body sobs that shook his shoulders and left him gasping for air. All the years of grief, all the years of wondering, all the guilt of not saving her, not finding her, not knowing. It poured out of him. When he finally composed himself, he folded the results carefully and went to find Jonas. The boy was in the guest room where he'd been staying for 3 days, showered, fed, dressed in new clothes that actually fit, but his eyes were hollow with anxiety. Mr. Drake? Jonas stood when Alexander entered. Did the results come? Alexander nodded, unable to speak yet. Jonas's face went pale. And? Alexander held out the paper with shaking hands. Jonas took it, eyes scanning the words. Once, twice, 3 times, like he couldn't believe what he was reading. 99.9%, Jonas whispered. That means. It means you're my son, Alexander said, his voice breaking. Jonas, you're my son. Jonas looked up, and Alexander saw the same mix of emotions he felt. Joy, grief, disbelief, hope, fear that this couldn't be real. Jonas's voice cracked. I really have a dad? A real dad? Yes. And you're not going to change your mind? You're not going to send me back to the shed? Never. Alexander dropped to his knees, so they were eye level. Jonas, I spent 9 years not knowing you existed. I lost 9 years of your life. I'm not losing another day. Jonas's face crumpled. Tears streamed down his cheeks. Can I? He hesitated, afraid to ask. Can I call you Dad? Alexander's throat closed. He couldn't speak, could only nod. Dad, Jonas whispered, testing the word. Please, Alexander managed, voice breaking completely. Please call me that. Dad, Jonas said again, and this time it wasn't a question. Alexander pulled him into an embrace, the first real embrace between father and son. Jonas was so small, so thin, all sharp angles and bones. Alexander held him carefully, like he might break. "I've got you," Alexander whispered. "I've got you now. You're safe. You're home. You're mine." Jonas clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder. "I missed you. Even though I never met you, I missed you my whole life." "I know. I missed you too." They stayed like that for a long time. Two people who'd been lost, finally finding each other. Later in Alexander's study, Jonas sat on the couch while Alexander made phone calls. "I need legal documents drawn up, custody paperwork, and adoption proceedings. Yes, I know I'm the biological father, but I want it formalized. Everything official." Alexander's voice was steady now, all business. "And file for a legal name change. Jonas Miller becomes Jonas Drake. I want it done by the end of the week." Jonas looked up at that. "Drake? I get your last name?" "If you want it." "I want it," Jonas said immediately. "Jonas Drake. That sounds real." Alexander smiled, the first genuine smile in years. "It is real. You're a Drake. My son. My heir." But then his smile faded as he looked at his calendar. Tomorrow he had something else to do. Something he'd been avoiding for 3 days while he waited for confirmation. "Jonas," Alexander said carefully, "I need to do something tomorrow. Something difficult." "What?" "I need to confront my father. The man who forced your mother to leave. The man who's responsible for—" He couldn't finish. Jonas's face hardened. "The man who's responsible for Mom dying alone." "Yes." "Can I come with you?" Jonas asked. Alexander shook his head. "Not this time. This is something I need to do alone. But I promise you, he's going to face consequences for what he did. To Elena, to you, to all of us." Jonas nodded slowly. "Okay. But Dad?" "Yes?" "Don't let him hurt you. Mom always said powerful people can hurt you in ways you don't expect." Alexander's chest tightened. "I won't. He can't hurt me anymore. I have you now. That's all that matters." That night, after Jonas had gone to bed, Alexander sat alone with his memories. He thought about the first time he'd seen Elena, shy, gentle Elena, arranging flowers in the main hall. How he'd found excuses to walk past her, just to see her smile. He remembered their first conversation, late at night in the staff kitchen. She'd been reading, curled up in a chair that was too big for her. "I thought everyone was asleep," she'd whispered. "They'd talked until dawn about everything and nothing." He remembered the garden, the oak tree where they'd meet in secret. The night he'd kissed her for the first time, rain starting to fall, her soft gasp of surprise. He remembered giving her the pendant. "This is a promise, Elena. When I take over from my father, we'll be together. No more hiding, no more pretending. I'll marry you in front of everyone." She'd cried, happy tears. "Are you sure? Your father will never approve." "I don't need his approval. I just need you." But his father had found out, had destroyed everything, had threatened Elena with Alexander's future, and she'd believed him. She'd left to save him. And she'd died protecting their son from a family that didn't deserve him. Tomorrow, Victor Drake would answer for that. Alexander looked at the DNA results one more time, then locked them in his safe. 99.9% match. Father and son. Forever. Alexander didn't call ahead. He drove to his father's estate, a sprawling property even larger than his own, and walked straight through the front door like he owned it. Which technically, he would have, if his father's threats had never succeeded. Victor Drake sat in his oak-paneled study, reading the Wall Street Journal over morning coffee. At 72, he was still imposing, tall, silver-haired, with the same ice-blue eyes that had been passed down through generations. Eyes that Jonas now carried. "Alexander." Victor looked up, surprised. "I didn't know you were coming. If this is about the merger?" Alexander threw the letter onto the desk. The yellowed paper slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of Victor's coffee cup. The old man's eyes dropped to it, and something flickered across his face. Recognition. And something else. No remorse. "Elena Arden," Alexander said, his voice deadly quiet. "You remember her?" Victor set down his newspaper slowly. "The maid. Yes, I remember. You threatened her, told her I'd lose everything if she didn't disappear. I did what was necessary." Victor's tone was matter-of-fact, like they were discussing a business decision. "Alexander, you were 28 years old, heir to a billion-dollar company, and you were having an affair with a woman who cleaned our floors. It was inappropriate, reckless. It was love, Alexander said, his fists clenched so tight his nails cut into his palms. It was a liability. Victor stood, straightening his jacket. She was a maid, Alexander. You were the heir. If that relationship had become public, the scandal, the media attention, the board's reaction, it would have ruined everything I'd built. So you destroyed her instead. I gave her an opportunity to leave with dignity. $50,000. That's more than she would have made in 5 years. You told her I'd lose my inheritance. Alexander's voice rose. You told her she'd destroy me. She left because she loved me, because she believed your threats. Victor's expression didn't change. Then she made the right choice. The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. The right choice, he repeated, voice shaking with rage. She died in poverty, Father. Did you know that? She died 6 months ago in a free clinic, unable to afford medicine, alone except for the 8-year-old son she'd been raising by herself. For the first time, Victor's composure cracked slightly. Son? Yes, my son. The child she was carrying when you forced her out. Alexander pulled the DNA results from his pocket and threw them on the desk. Jonas, your grandson. He's been living in an abandoned shed, selling water on the street to survive, while you sat here in your mansion counting your money. Victor picked up the results, scanned them, his face going pale. You have a child? I have a son. Elena was pregnant when she left. She was going to tell me that day, but you got to her first. Alexander's voice turned venomous. She raised him alone. Sick, poor, desperate. And she died protecting him from you, from this family, because she believed you'd hurt him the way you hurt her. I was protecting you. You cost me everything. Alexander slammed his fist on the desk, making the coffee cup rattle. You cost me the woman I loved. You cost my son 8 years of his life. You cost Elena her life. All because you cared more about reputation than human beings. Victor's jaw tightened. I built this empire for you. Everything I did was to secure your future. You built an empire on cruelty and lies. Alexander's voice dropped to something cold and final. And I want no part of it. Alexander, don't be dramatic. You're no longer my father. The words came out clear, precise, irrevocable. I'm cutting all ties. No more family dinners. No more business partnerships. No more pretending you're anything other than the man who destroyed my life. Victor's face went rigid. You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more. Alexander turned toward the door. And you'll never meet Jonas. You'll never see your grandson. You'll never have the chance to hurt him the way you hurt Elena. Alexander, wait. I spent 9 years grieving a woman who didn't abandon me. She was driven away by you. I spent 8 years not knowing I had a son because of you. Alexander looked back, and Victor saw something in his son's eyes he'd never seen before. Complete rejection. I'll never forgive you for that, and I'll never give you the chance to hurt my family again. I'm your family, Victor said, and for the first time, his voice cracked. No, you're not. Alexander walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Jonas is my family. Elena was my family. You're just the man who tried to destroy them. He walked out, leaving Victor alone in his oak-paneled study, surrounded by everything he'd built and everything he'd just lost. When Alexander returned to the mansion, Jonas was waiting in the entrance hall, pacing nervously. Dad? He rushed forward. What happened? Did you see him? Alexander knelt down, taking Jonas's shoulders gently. It's over. He can't hurt us anymore. What did he say? He tried to justify it, tried to say he was protecting me. Alexander's voice was bitter. But I made it clear we're done. No more contact. He'll never be part of our lives. Jonas's face was conflicted. Does he want to meet me? Alexander saw the hope and fear warring in his son's eyes. The desire to be wanted, even by a grandfather who'd caused so much pain. Jonas, listen to me. Alexander pulled him into a hug. It doesn't matter what he wants. We don't need him. We have each other. That's what family really is. People who choose to love each other, who protect each other, who never let cruelty win. But what if? No what ifs. Alexander held him tighter. Your mother loved you enough to give up everything to keep you safe. And I love you enough to make sure no one, not my father, not anyone ever makes you feel unwanted again. Jonas buried his face in Alexander's shoulder. Okay, Dad. We're going to be okay, Alexander whispered. Better than okay. We're going to be happy. That's the best revenge, building a good life, despite what he tried to destroy. They stood there in the entrance hall, father and son, united against a past that had tried to break them. But it hadn't succeeded. They'd found each other. And that was enough. That evening, after dinner, Jonas's third real meal in as many days, Alexander stood at the base of the grand staircase, looking up at the third floor. "Jonas," he called, "can you come here for a moment?" The boy appeared from the library, where he'd been reading. In just 3 days, he'd started to look different, cleaner, healthier, less like a ghost. But his eyes still carried wariness, like he expected this dream to end at any moment. "Yes, Dad?" Alexander's chest tightened every time Jonas called him that. "There's something I need to show you, something I've never shown anyone." Jonas followed him up the stairs, past the second floor where the guest rooms were, up to the third floor that Alexander rarely visited. At the end of the hallway was a door with a deadbolt lock. Alexander's hands shook as he pulled out the key. "I haven't opened this door in 9 years, he said quietly. "After your mother left, I locked it and told myself I'd deal with it eventually, but I never could." He turned the key. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside, everything was covered in white dust sheets, like ghosts of furniture frozen in time. Jonas stepped inside cautiously. "What is this place?" "Wait here." Alexander moved through the room, pulling off dust sheets one by one. The first revealed a wooden crib, still pristine, with a mobile of stars and moons hanging above it. The second uncovered a rocking chair positioned by the window, a perfect spot for watching the garden below. The third revealed a changing table, supplies still neatly organized, diapers, wipes, baby powder. The fourth exposed shelves lined with toys, still in their boxes, teddy bears, building blocks, picture books for babies. The walls were painted a soft, peaceful blue. And on the rocking chair, carefully folded, was a small blue blanket with baby Drake embroidered in silver thread. Jonas stood frozen in the center of the room, eyes wide, trying to understand what he was seeing. "I prepared this 10 years ago," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. "When your mother told me she was pregnant, you knew about me." "Yes." Alexander picked up the blue blanket, running his fingers over the embroidery. "Elena told me the day before she disappeared. She was scared, but I was." His voice broke. "I was so happy, Jonas. Happier than I'd ever been in my life." Jonas walked slowly to the crib, reaching out to touch the mobile. It spun gently, stars catching the light. "I started preparing immediately," Alexander continued. "I bought this crib, painted these walls, chose every toy carefully. I wanted everything to be perfect for you, for our baby." "But Mom left," Jonas whispered. "Yes. The next day she was gone, and I didn't know why. I thought she'd changed her mind about me, about us, about having a family together." Alexander set down the blanket. "But I couldn't bring myself to get rid of any of this. Every time I tried, I'd remember how excited I was, how ready I was to be a father. So I covered everything up and locked the door." Jonas turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "This was all for me?" "All of it." Alexander moved to the bookshelf and pulled out a frame he'd kept hidden behind the toys. "Even this." He handed it to Jonas. Inside was an ultrasound photo, grainy, black and white, barely distinguishable. But in the center was a tiny shape, no bigger than a bean. "That's you," Alexander said softly. "Your first picture. Your mother gave it to me the day she told me. I've kept it all these years." Jonas stared at the photo, tears streaming down his face. "You wanted me. Even before I was born, you wanted me. More than anything." Alexander knelt beside him. "Jonas, you need to understand I didn't abandon you. I didn't know where you were. If I had known, if I'd had any idea Elena was alive and raising you, I would have torn the world apart to find you." "I know." Jonas clutched the ultrasound photo. "Mom said my dad didn't know about me. I never understood what she meant until now. She was protecting you from my father, from the threats he made. She thought keeping you secret was the only way to keep you safe." Alexander's voice turned fierce. "But you don't have to hide anymore. You don't have to be afraid. This room," he gestured around them, "this has always been yours. I just didn't know when you'd come home to claim it." Jonas looked at the crib, the rocking chair, the toys, the blanket. "Can I?" He hesitated. "Can I stay here? In this room? With you? Alexander felt his throat close. Jonas, this is your room. It's always been your room. I've been waiting 9 years for you to sleep in that crib, to play with those toys, to let me rock you to sleep in that chair. I'm too big for the crib now, Jonas said, a small smile breaking through his tears. I know, Alexander laughed, wiping his own eyes. Tomorrow we'll get you a proper bed, but tonight, he picked up the blue blanket. Tonight you can sleep in the guest room with this, the blanket I bought for you before you were born. Jonas took the blanket, holding it against his chest like it was made of gold. It says Baby Drake, because that's who you are. That's who you've always been, even when neither of us knew it. That night, Alexander tucked Jonas into the guest room bed temporary until they could furnish the nursery properly. He draped the blue blanket over him, smoothing it down gently. Dad? Jonas's voice was small in the dark. Yes? I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and find out this was a dream, right? Alexander sat on the edge of the bed. No, this is real. You're my son. You're home. And I'm never letting you go. Promise? I promise. On your mother's memory, on everything I have, I promise you're safe now. Jonas's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion from days of emotional upheaval finally catching up to him. Alexander sat there long after Jonas fell asleep, watching his son, his actual son, breathing peacefully in a real bed, wrapped in a blanket that had been waiting 9 years for him. He thought of Elena, of how she died never knowing that Jonas would eventually find his way here, never knowing that Alexander had been ready to be a father all along. I'll take care of him. Alexander whispered to the darkness. I'll give him everything you couldn't. I'll love him enough for both of us. I promise, Elena. I promise. In his sleep, Jonas smiled. And for the first time in 9 years, the nursery Alexander had built wasn't a shrine to loss. It was a promise of home. Week 1. School. Jonas stood outside Whitmore Academy, clutching his new backpack so tightly his knuckles were white. The building looked more like a museum than a school. Tall columns, manicured lawns, students arriving in luxury cars. I don't belong here, Jonas whispered. Alexander knelt beside him. You belong there as much as anyone, more, because you fought harder to get here than any of those kids ever will. But what if they ask about where I've been? What if they... Then you tell them the truth, that you're my son, that you're a Drake, and that anyone who has a problem with that can talk to me. Alexander squeezed his shoulder. You're brave, Jonas. You survived things these kids can't even imagine. A classroom full of 8-year-olds doesn't scare you. It did scare him, but Jonas walked through those doors anyway. By the end of the first week, he'd made a friend, a quiet boy named Marcus who liked reading and didn't ask too many questions. It was a start. Week 2. Legal. The courtroom was smaller than Jonas expected. The judge, a kind-looking woman with gray hair, smiled at him from behind her desk. Jonas Miller, she said, your father has petitioned to legally formalize your adoption and change your name. Do you understand what that means? Jonas nodded. It means I get to be Jonas Drake. And is that what you want? Yes, ma'am. More than anything. The judge signed the papers. Then, congratulations, Jonas Arden Drake. Welcome to your family, officially. In the hallway afterward, Jonas stared at the certificate. Jonas Arden Drake, he whispered. I have his last name. I'm really his son now. You were always my son, Alexander said. This just makes it official for everyone else. Week 3. Public. Alexander's company anniversary gala was exactly the kind of event Jonas had nightmares about: hundreds of people in expensive clothes, cameras everywhere, everyone watching. But Alexander kept him close. Ladies and gentlemen, Alexander said from the podium, one hand on Jonas's shoulder. I'd like to introduce you to someone very important. This is my son, Jonas. The room erupted in whispers. Cameras flashed, questions were shouted from reporters. But Alexander just smiled. That's all you need to know. Now, let's celebrate 20 years of Drake Industries. Later, when a journalist cornered them, asking invasive questions about where Jonas had come from, Alexander's voice turned cold. My son's past is his own. If you'd like to keep your press credentials, I suggest you respect that. The journalist backed away. Jonas looked up at his father with something like awe. You didn't let them hurt me. Never, Alexander said firmly. Not ever. Week 4. Healing. The therapist's office was warm, filled with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. Dr. Sarah Chen specialized in trauma and family attachment. "Jonas," she said gently, "can you tell me about your mother?" Jonas's eyes filled with tears. "She was sick. For a long time. I tried to help her, but I couldn't. I couldn't save her." "That wasn't your job to save her," Dr. Chen said. "You were a child. You loved her, and that's what mattered." In a separate session, Alexander sat in the same chair. "I lost 9 years," he said, voice raw. 9 years I could have been his father. 9 years Elena suffered alone. "You can't get those years back," Dr. Chen said. "But you have all the years ahead. Don't waste them grieving what was lost. Celebrate what you've found." Week 6. Traditions. Saturday mornings became sacred. Alexander, who'd never cooked in his life, learned to make pancakes. They were terrible at first, burnt, lopsided, somehow both raw and overcooked. Jonas laughed so hard he nearly fell off his chair. "You're supposed to be supportive," Alexander protested, but he was laughing too. Evening walks through the garden became ritual. Jonas would point out flowers, asking their names. Alexander would make up ridiculous answers until Jonas caught on and tackled him on the grass. Bedtime stories in the newly furnished bedroom, the nursery transformed into a space for an 8-year-old boy, but keeping the blue walls Jonas had loved. And Alexander teaching Jonas about the business. "Someday, if you want this, it's yours. But only if you want it. No pressure, no expectations, just possibilities." Week 8. Memorial. Alexander hired landscapers to create a memorial garden in the mansion's east corner. White roses, Elena's favorite, a stone bench, a fountain with gentle water sounds. In the center, a plaque, "Elena Arden, beloved, remembered, forever." Jonas planted flowers around it, dirt under his fingernails, tears on his cheeks. "Mom loved white roses. She said they meant new beginnings." "Then that's what this garden is," Alexander said, kneeling beside him. "A new beginning for all of us." They placed Elena's photograph there, protected in a weatherproof frame. Every morning, they visited. Every evening, Jonas would tell his mother about his day. "She gave me the greatest gift," Alexander told Jonas one night. "You. And I'll make sure you always know how much she loved you." Challenges. Some nights, Jonas woke screaming, dreaming he was back in the shed, cold and alone. Alexander would rush in, hold him, whisper, "You're safe. You're home. I'm here." Alexander made mistakes, forgot to pack lunches, said the wrong thing, didn't know how to braid hair or tie certain knots or explain why friends sometimes hurt your feelings. But Jonas was patient. "We're both learning, Dad." They grieved together. For Elena, for lost time, for the family they should have been. But they also built together. New memories, new traditions, a new life neither had thought possible. That night, as Alexander tucked Jonas in, the boy asked, "Dad, tell me about Mom, when you first met her." Alexander settled onto the edge of the bed. She was arranging flowers in the entrance hall, humming. I asked what song it was, and she blushed and said she'd made it up. "Did you love her right away?" "Not right away, but soon. She had this way of seeing the good in everything." Alexander smiled. "She would have been so proud of you, Jonas. So proud of the brave, kind person you're becoming. Do you think she can see us?" "I think she knows you're safe and loved, and that's all she ever wanted." Jonas fell asleep with a smile on his face. And Alexander sat there, keeping watch, grateful for second chances and water bottles sold in the rain, and boys who were brave enough to ask one simple question. "Where are your parents?" The answer had changed both their lives. 6 months later, Alexander's car pulled up to the mansion gates on a gray afternoon. Rain misted across the windshield, the same kind of soft drizzle that had fallen that first day. Jonas pressed his face against the window. "This is where we met." "Right there," Alexander said, pointing to the spot where a small boy had stood with a cooler, wet and shivering. "You asked me where my parents were. And you stopped." Jonas turned to his father. Nobody else stopped that day. They climbed out of the car, each carrying a case of water bottles. Not to sell, to give away. The foundation had been Jonas's idea 3 months ago, sitting at the breakfast table over Alexander's burnt pancakes. "Mom would want us to help kids like me," Jonas had said. "Kids who are alone and scared and don't know if anyone cares." Alexander had kissed the top of his son's head and made the first call that afternoon. Now the Elena Arden Foundation operated 3 safe houses across the city. Street children who sold goods to survive had a place to sleep, eat, and go to school. Social workers helped reunite them with family when possible. When it wasn't, foster families carefully vetted gave them homes. 23 children so far, 23 lives changed. She'd be proud of this, Alexander said, looking up at the mansion where Elena had once lived and loved and made up songs while arranging flowers. She'd be proud of you, Jonas said. They walked along the street where Jonas used to position himself for maximum foot traffic. The rain picked up, and that's when they saw her. A little girl, maybe 7, stood on the corner with a bucket of wilting flowers. Her shoes had holes. Her jacket was too thin. Her eyes held that same desperate hope Jonas remembered wearing like armor. Jonas stepped forward before Alexander could speak. "Hi," Jonas said gently, kneeling to her level. "Are you hungry?" The girl clutched her flowers tighter. "I'm selling these. They're really pretty. Only $5. "They're beautiful," Jonas agreed. "But I'm not asking if you're selling. I'm asking if you're hungry." Tears filled her eyes. "I haven't eaten since yesterday." Jonas looked back at his father. Alexander nodded. "My name's Jonas," he said to the girl. "This is my dad. We'd like to help you. Can you tell us your name?" "Maria." "Maria, do you have family? Someone taking care of you?" She shook her head. "My mom left. I live with my aunt, but she needs the money I make. If I don't sell enough," her voice cracked. Alexander knelt beside Jonas. "Maria, we have a place that helps kids, a safe place with food and beds and people who care. Would you like to see it?" "I can't leave my flowers." "Bring them," Jonas said. "We'll buy all of them." The news feature aired 2 weeks later. Alexander hadn't wanted the publicity, but the foundation needed awareness, funding, volunteers. The interviewer, a sharp woman named Catherine Reeves, sat across from Alexander in his office. "Mr. Drake, you've transformed from a notoriously private CEO to a vocal advocate for street children. What changed?" "I found my son," Alexander said simply, "and he taught me what really matters. Some call this redemption. I call it finally seeing clearly." Alexander leaned forward. "I had everything, money, power, success, but I was empty. Jonas filled a space I didn't know existed, and now we're trying to fill that space for other children." The camera panned to Jonas, sitting nearby doing homework. "Jonas, what do you want people to know?" Jonas looked up, thoughtful. "Kids like I was, we're not invisible. We're not problems. We're just trying to survive, and sometimes all we need is for one person to stop and see us." The letter from Victor arrived on thick stationery, his handwriting shaky with age. "Alexander, I was wrong. About everything. I let my pride destroy us. I'm sorry." Alexander held it for a long moment, then placed it in a drawer, unopened. "Aren't you going to read it?" Jonas asked. "No." Alexander's voice was gentle but firm. "Some bridges stay burned. I don't need his regret. I have what matters." Jonas nodded, understanding. Victor Drake lived alone in his penthouse, wealthy and empty. He'd sent gifts for Jonas, all returned. He'd tried calling, blocked. Sometimes consequences are permanent. "Do you think I'll ever meet him?" Jonas asked. "Only if you want to. Only when you're ready. He's your grandfather biologically, but family is more than blood. Then I already have all the family I need." Jonas brought home straight A's on his report card. His teacher wrote a note. "Jonas is exceptional, curious, kind, and remarkably resilient." That night, over dinner, Jonas talked about the future. "I want to help run the foundation someday," he said. "Maybe be a social worker, or start more safe houses in other cities." "You can do anything you want," Alexander said. "What I want is to make sure no kid feels as alone as I did." Elena's pendant sat in a shadow box in Jonas's room now, professionally repaired, surrounded by photos of her. Jonas kept fresh flowers beside it, white roses, always. Evening settled over the memorial garden. Father and son stood by Elena's plaque, Alexander placing fresh roses around her photograph. "I miss her," Jonas said quietly. "So do I, every day." Alexander put his arm around Jonas's shoulders. "But she gave us each other." "Dad?" "Yeah, son? I'm glad I sold water that day. I'm glad you stopped." Alexander pulled Jonas close, voice thick with emotion. "Me too, Jonas, me too." Above them, the sky cleared. A single star appeared in the twilight. Jonas smiled. That's Mom. Saying good night. Then good night, Elena, Alexander whispered. Thank you for our son. Thank you for showing me what love means. Thank you for the greatest gift. They stood there as darkness fell, two people bound by loss and love, by chance and choice, by a rainy afternoon and a simple question that changed everything. The boy who sold water to survive became the son who saved his father's soul. The billionaire learned that wealth isn't counted in billions, but in bedtime stories and burnt pancakes and moments of grace. Sometimes the family you thought you lost is waiting just beyond the gate, holding a cooler and a heart full of hope. Sometimes one act of kindness, one person who stops, who sees, who cares, changes two lives forever. And sometimes, the most valuable thing you'll ever own stands beside you, calling you Dad.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Subscribe, like, and click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.